In the year of our Lord, 2019, three strangers connected by the internet began a podcast. This is their story.
Welcome, everyone, to episode 47 of the Single Malt Strategy Podcast. I'm your host, Jean, the Strategy Wargamer. I'm here with my co-hosts, Matt, the Historical Gamer, and Eric, TortugaPower. Welcome, guys, and welcome back to the show.
It's been a long time. I thought that this was just all dead, maybe just a figment of my imagination.
TortugaPower, I choose you!
I think I know what we should talk about for the next hour.
It's morphin time.
Pokemon!
What have you been playing lately, Jean? Let's hear from you first.
So, what I've been playing a lot is I want to kind of save for the meat of the episode. I wanted to start out with Command Modern Operations. I wanted to get your guys' feedback. This is what's been circulating through my head today, and I wanted to get your feedback.
Have you played Command at all, Simo?
Yeah, I started up earlier this week, and I wanted, so Matt has been raving about this game. Previous versions of this game. So I was very hyped to get into this game, and I heard something like crazy that there's like half a terabyte of data just from the maps that they have in this game, which is like epic. And the game download was like 4 to 5 gigabytes. So I was really, really motivated to get in this game. So I started up. I was going through a whole bunch of scenarios on this game, and this game has it all. I mean, it has like the Vietnam War. It has the Falkland Islands War. It has like what if scenarios for World War III. I mean, it has it all. And I was just stoked. But I had one problem. Every time a lot of those versions, like a good example is I wanted to play the Cuban Missile Crisis. That was an extra cost. It was like, I think $2, $2 or $3 to get that version. So I was like, look, I'm not going to pay for that right now. Let me see what's included with the main copy of the game. The other thing that I noticed was it took a long time, like, for the map to load. So, like, it was kind of not pixelated, but it was borderline between, DVD quality and Blu-ray quality in terms of, like, how the map was presented on the screen. And then after, like, maybe a couple of minutes, I could see, like, the sea, the ocean, and the terrain getting a little bit more HD. I just noticed that these maps required a lot of computer resources. Like, it was heavy. I mean, I think it took more of my computer resources than, like, I would say Battlefield, on medium to high graphics.
Well, I mean, I think the thing you need to think about is it's not maps. There's one map. It's the globe. You can literally zoom out and you can scroll around the entire globe without ever opening up another map or anything like that. So it's essentially the globe, and then you just wherever you are, when you zoom in on that spot of the world, it takes a few seconds for it to pop up or whatever, to load the higher resolution. And depending on how close you zoom in or out, there's different levels of detail depending on, are you looking at it from space? Because you basically can look at the globe from space, or you can zoom all the way down to, not quite street level view, but kind of the, like satellite picture view. Level granularity, and zoom down into a city, and you can see city blocks and other things like that from sort of a 10,000 foot level.
You're basically saying that instead of loading just a section, like, for example, if we're talking about the Falkland Island War, instead of, loading just that entire region, it's loading Argentina, the US, UK, France, Russia.
It does it the same way Google Maps does it, so that when you zoom in on a location, it begins to load those assets, and then when you zoom out, it unloads them to clear system memory, etc.
And usually it's not doesn't matter too much because most of your battles are not taking place across the whole globe. But when you first zoom in for the first time into a scenario, into that one box of the globe that you're fighting in, yeah, it can take a little bit for it to load up.
I didn't have this problem. I mean, it does if you want to. Like, I remember THG, in his stream, he zoomed down to Chicago. And yeah, when you go down from the entire globe down to Chicago, it does take a moment, but
Yeah, I mean, it probably took 3 or 4 seconds. It was nothing that...
Yeah, it wasn't that much.
And I had just gone from the North Sea over to Chicago and then zoomed all the way in, and so it didn't have the North Sea assets. It had the North Sea assets loaded. I zoomed all the way out, scrolled all the way over to Chicago, zoomed all the way down, and I'd say in the span of 5 seconds, it was almost all the way up to the high-resolution satellite image.
Oh, okay. Interesting. I didn't know it did that.
Yeah.
So a couple other things that I did like about it. One is the stats on the units is very detailed. So I do like that they did their homework and you got tons and tons of data for each unit. So that's really cool.
I mean, we should really emphasize this point. This is not just do their homework. This is military knowledge level of details. They have everything that a ship or aircraft or submarine or land unit, they have everything that unit can have listed. And supposedly that's also part of the combat in the game. So it's very impressive.
I wonder if this is like the actual, I guess, engine that maybe the military uses for training.
I think so.
I mean, so let's take a step back. Command Modern Operations, what is it? It's the sequel to Command Modern Air Naval Operations. In terms of what that really means, it is a global military simulation engine that primarily takes place in a 2D plane, but it allows you to zoom in and zoom out so that you can, as we've kind of talked about in the map, fight a battle anywhere on the world. It has a database that includes thousands of military units of hardware all the way from the end of the Second World War into the near future. The units' detail and their stats and how accurately they're modeled is probably best captured if you're thinking of like a Jane's Warships of the World compendium or something like that, where you've got like a detailed breakout of every single vessel, a little bit of history of every single vessel, a little bit, a detailed breakout of all of the different sensors, the radar, the sonar. Not just the fact that they have radar and sonar, but what specific module are they using? What year was that built in? What frequencies does that play in? The sonar, the everything from dipping sonar on helicopters to individual blocks or models of a Hellfire missile, which might have 5 or 6 or 7 different blocks. This is a military simulator in every meaning of that word. It is the most detailed, the most comprehensive, publicly available military simulator. And Command Modern Air Naval Operations was so successful in that realm that they signed multiple government contracts with the Luftwaffe of Germany, with the Pentagon in the U.S. They have contracts with BAE in England, so that's basically the Lockheed Martin of England. This is an incredibly successful and robust product. And Command Modern Operations, I would almost term it less as a sequel and more as a new. You think about like when Adobe released like Creative Suite 3 or 4 or whatever, and then they come out with a new one with a whole basically new undercarriage and capabilities, and it essentially replaces the previous one. That's really what this is. And one of the cool things, I mean, you kind of talked about how there were individual DLC packs that you didn't have, but one of the really cool things with this game is that Command Modern Air Naval Operations had a fair bit of DLC. I think there were 3 or 4 campaigns and probably maybe 10 live scenarios as well that were put out as DLC. All of that, if you bought any of that, carries over to Command Modern Operations. So anything that you purchased from a DLC perspective still works in the new engine. The engine includes overhauls to air-to-air combat to be much more detailed. They added 3D. They added support for a program called TACView, which is not made by them, but it is a program that a lot of flight sim enthusiasts will use that allows you to like replay or see, your engagement or your dogfight in DCS or IL-2 in like a replay mode in 3D with like God's Eye View. Well, TACView is now supported in Command, except you can play with it in real time. The main drawback there is the fact that it has kind of a God's Eye view, so it removes all fog of war. You can see everything in this 3D view. It is a separate program. It is sold by a separate company. It's not cheap, but it does add a 3D layer if that's something you're really interested in. And I'm trying to think of really if you're looking for a gaming comparison, this is a much more modern version of Harpoon of the 1980s and early 90s. And that was the kind of program that they were setting out to make, and I think they did a pretty successful job of that. There are areas that I think are weak spots in the game. I don't think it covers land combat terribly well. I haven't been able to poke around with this version of the game to see if it's much better. I know they're saying they've made a lot of enhancements, but admittedly, even in like the product description, the developers say like, hey, if you're looking for a really detailed ground versus ground combat simulator, you should probably check out a game like Armored Brigade or Flashpoint Campaigns. They specifically call that out, I think maybe even on their Steam page. So they acknowledge that this is not close combat. This is much more an air combat, a naval combat, and an air-to-ground combat game than it is ground versus ground. Although certainly ground elements of anti-air weaponry is tremendously modeled and a lot of other things. It's just not meant to simulate a blitzkrieg across Europe, at least at this time.
So this game is not for the faint of heart. It seems like it's, like you were saying, it's basically the most highly detailed and realistic strategy game, the closest you will ever be to being at like a TOC or Army HQ.
I mean, it's hard to say it's a strategic because it's really almost tactical. You're not commanding. I mean, you're commanding, but most scenarios probably put you in charge of maybe like 10 to 20 units, which could mean that you're in charge of a carrier with lots of fighters, and you have a refuel jet with some other fighters, and then you have some ships. So you can get maybe up to like 30 things, but that's kind of a lot. A lot of scenarios can put you in charge of just 1 or 2 units. And it's mostly about...
And some put you in charge of hundreds, to be fair.
Okay, yeah. I have never played a mission with hundreds, but probably intentionally to avoid that.
I have only failed at those size scenarios, but they exist.
Yeah, to me it's mostly about like, okay, choosing what's the avenue of approach for my aircraft or my ships. What's the like sensor MCON type stuff I'm going to be doing? Am I going to go active? Am I going to use passive? All those kind of things. Like if you're doing submarines, if you're going to stay above the layer, below the layer, which missile, which ordnance to fire if you're air to air. All those kind of decisions. It seems a lot more tactical in that sense than strategic. But yeah, I want to emphasize...
Yeah, I would say it's tactical and operations, I would say, because there are multi-day scenarios, and there are... The logistics is modeled. You only have so many weapons. There are sometimes resupply missions. But I would say it's tactics with an element of operations.
Yeah, and I want to emphasize again TSG's point that this is pretty much military grade, so that's... I mean, probably a big selling point for a lot of people. They would love to like be looking at the same kind of screens, or at least you can imagine you're looking at the same kind of screens that the military is using, and trying to react in the same situation. It kind of reminds me of there was a game when I was much younger. There was a flight tower control person. You would just navigate airplanes to the destination, and it really boring in some sense, but kind of cool if you wanted to be a air traffic controller. And this is kind of like that, but for the military.
Yeah, I mean, this is, if you were going to imagine that you were at NORAD, like looking at all the, everything on the big board, if you will, like that's very much what this game is. And I think one of the things that's really impressive about this is, I know, Jean, you were trying to jump in a couple of different scenarios. I think there's like 20 or something scenarios that come with the game outside of the DLC packs, but the other thing is this has an incredibly robust community support. And so while there might be 20 developer-designed scenarios, there are literally hundreds upon hundreds of user-developed scenarios. And wow. You can literally make any conflict, any scenario, any hypothetical battle that you want to make from 1946 to the near future, you can make it. And so that's one of the really impressive things. I was playing a scenario in one of my streams called Iron Hand, which is one of the developer scenarios, and I was not doing very well. I was Russia, and I was trying to bomb some targets in the Caucasus. Actually, no, it was in Azerbaijan, and which is in the Caucasus, right? Yeah. Anyway, I was trying to bomb Azerbaijan over some conflict between Armenia and Azerbaijan, and Russia's getting involved. And I'm trying to knock out these SAM sites, and I was really struggling, and I was getting a little bit frustrated because this is not for the faint of heart. As you've already mentioned. And big complex scenarios I don't do well in because I don't understand a lot of the the doctrine or or some of the things you need to know to be successful about operating a anti-SAM campaign when you're Russia and you don't have all the bells and whistles that America has. But anyway, so I was getting frustrated. So what I did was I saved the game. I jumped out of the scenario. I went to the main menu. I opened up the editor. I loaded the game from the editor. And then I imported a pre-import of 3 Russian ICBM fields from the late 1990s. About 150 nuclear warheads all told. And I ordered I set the doctrine to nuclear weapons free, and I let the AI do the rest. And the AI coordinated 150 ICBM strike on the small country of Azerbaijan. And I watched as 150 missiles went up in TAC view, beautifully up in TAC view, sailed across the sky into the low atmosphere, re-entered at over 5,000 knots, and slowly but very methodically in a checkerboard pattern erased Azerbaijan from the face of the earth.
Now the question is, like, do you get like animations when that happens? Like, do you see individual like mushroom clouds or?
No, I mean the game is it's a 2D base, so it's very very much like a war gamey kind of a thing. So like the movie War Game, it's kind of like that. Like you get a small white impact, and then it expands and expands and expands as the the mushroom cloud or the shockwave would expand. And that does depend on the size of the warhead, so how big that area of destruction is certainly influenced by the warhead. But you don't get like 500 mushroom clouds. Later in that scenario, I decided, hey, why don't I go USA versus Russia? I loaded all the US ICBM fields, and I loaded all of Russia's ICBM fields, and I think I had about 3,000 missiles in the air, and then my computer just decided, you know what? I can't do all the physics that's required with this. I'm going to move 1 second every 10 seconds, and so then I just exit.
Wow, really? With your rig?
I overloaded my CPU.
Yeah, but the computer you have is no slouch.
I don't have that modern of a rig.
I don't think it's surprising. I mean,
I have a 1080 for graphics, but that doesn't have... I mean, this game is much more RAM and CPU heavy than it is graphics heavy.
What CPU do you have?
4790. So it was very, very high end 3 or 4 years ago. It's definitely not a Threadripper.
By the way, I think that it's completely normal for launching 3,000... I mean, even like 1,000 nukes. I'm pretty sure... I'm not even sure if you should ever launch more than, let's just say, 500 nukes without killing your computer.
Well, and Dimitri, the head guy of Warfare Sims, was actually watching the stream, and he basically told me what was happening. I forget all the details, but he was kind of like, "This is why it's freezing." Basically, is essentially there were too many, because again, this is a full global physics engine basically. So it's trying to do all of these ballistic calculations for literally thousands of missiles while they're moving at speed. All of the radar sensors and aircraft that were going on in the other part of the theater, because I still had probably 30 or 40 Russian assets in the middle of a battle while this was all going on. It was trying to do too many things. But one of the things that they did do apparently with Command is they did also provide a lot better multi-core support, which Command Modern Air Naval Operations wasn't optimized very well for that. Apparently there were some big enhancements in the engine for that.
I'm not at all surprised, basically, because I think that the game is probably not meant to run with that many things.
Well, no.
I don't know what Dimitri said, but I don't think that I don't think the game is going to have an easy time modeling 500 warheads.
It's not an ICBM simulator. It's more meant to simulate missiles and aircraft that are engaged in a theater in a combat scenario. So, all of the details that you need to accurately model a dogfight, all of that complex calculation that has to go on for those aircraft, when all of a sudden you pile on 3,000 additional calculations like that, you're going to overload your CPU, and that's perfectly fine. The game's not designed to
definitely
do that.
Not. If you play any of the scenarios, if you play them normally, I don't think you'll encounter this issue.
Now, did it crash your computer? Did you get like blue screen of death?
No, nothing like that. It just kind of slowed down. Demetrius was even like, now try and scroll around on the map. And I scrolled around on the map, and it was silky smooth butter. It was just
No way, that's awesome. Yeah. Wow, I was about to say, I'm surprised your computer didn't crash, because most games probably wouldn't build in like resource management well enough, but I think they've done a very good job with this then. It kind of speaks to it.
Yeah, I mean, he was very proud. He was basically like, If you scroll around the map, it's
that's cool.
still very smooth. It's just the calculations for the units that are slowing down. So there's obviously some sort of prioritization.
Cool. Yeah, that's pretty cool. That means they've done good programming.
So you mentioned something about there's literally hundreds, if not thousands, of scenarios. So is there a scenario editor attached to this game? I know there's a quick battle generator.
Yeah, and it's very good. It's pretty simple to use. I haven't used it in Command, but I used it in Cmano, and it was very easy to do. You just grab your units, you put them in the map, and you can start your scenario.
Oh, wow.
You can probably do a lot more scripting, which I didn't do. I didn't get into actually telling units to make patrols and stuff, which you can do. But if you just wanted to put, what I wanted to do is I wanted to put 2 submarines in the ocean, have them fight each other, and I was able to do that. So
yeah, I mean, my nuclear example was literally me jumping into the editor, pulling the scenario down, and playing it through while in the editor. So yes, there's a full scenario editor that everybody has access to. It's right there on the main menu of the game, actually. And it's pretty damn intuitive for this kind of thing. You can go really simple, like what Tortuga talked about, and you can fully script things in Lua, which is, I guess, the language or whatever that the scripting is done in. And people have made scenarios that are just as complex as the ones that come with the game. You can have events trigger that can change, the outcome of what's going on. You can have units that are not hostile turn to hostile. You can fully script these campaigns out so that all of these different variables and actions in the game that occur can affect what happens later. So it's a pretty well built out engine, and it's also or editor, and it's also really intuitive for what it is. And I do want to say one thing. The quick battle generator is freaking brilliant. This is a new feature that is with CMO. And the ability to just really quickly say, like, hey, I want to do a simple dogfight, 6 aircraft versus 6 aircraft, F-22s versus PAC FAs or whatever, and the ability to just instantly generate that might actually be one of the best ways to learn the game, is just do a couple of those, because they're small, they're compact, and they're easy to manage, and yet they show off a lot of the complexity and the kind of basics that you need to understand to play the game well. So I think the quick battles, at least the dogfights specifically, I think are really a solid piece, an addition to the game.
So the game is $80. So who would you recommend this for? I mean, do you feel like everybody should, get a taste of this game and try it out? Or is it for like a particular niche type of gamer?
I don't know. I mean, basically the people who like this kind of thing are probably going to be very interested. I don't think there's anything like this on the market, really.
So you would say like people that like Armored Brigade or like Crusader Kings? Do you feel like?
I would say, I mean, so if you like, there's definitely an audience to this, because every time there's a sale, you will see somehow it pops into like the top 20 sellers on Steam at that time. This is a very, the previous version of the game, based off of all anecdotal evidence, I have no real evidence or information. But based off anecdotal evidence, it was very successful. I remember, I think when it first went on Steam, it was a top 10 Steam seller for like a week. So I mean, it was very well regarded. That being said, it is definitely not a game for everybody. I would say if you're someone who played the original Harpoon back in the day, obviously a game that you probably would be interested in, because this is very much in many ways the spiritual successor. I would say if you're someone who used to be into microprose, or really, if you're into simulations, complex simulations, it's probably a game worth checking out. This is more of a simulation, in all honesty, than a game.
This is kind of like for people who, to move it into like the simulation, to make that analogy more clear, it's like people might want to play War Thunder or whatever, and this is more the game for people who like DCS and IL-2, those kind of more hardcore simulators. Or if some people may like Cold Waters, which is a little bit arcadey. It actually models things really well. But for those of you who are hardcore and wanted something like Dangerous Waters or 688 Attack Sub, I mean, those, like, the more hardcore, full simulator, full realism type things, it's going to appeal to those kind of people, more hardcore.
And the learning curve, from what I can see, because when I started playing the game, just to move units, I, like you guys mentioned, I have to plot course and stuff like that. But when I was going over the entire UI, I'll be honest, I got a little bit overwhelmed, because when you select a unit or an item like there's a massive amount of options. Like you can, if I select a unit, there's so many things that you can change out, the loadouts, the weapons, go into like an air base, you can change all the vehicles that it has. I mean, just a lot of stuff. So each unit, there can be an entire like column of options that you can alter. And that's why when I was playing, I was like, this is definitely not for the faint of heart. The learning curve I feel for something like this would probably take a lot more time than a traditional strategy game.
Well, how much time were you able to put into it, Sean?
Not long, so probably about a half hour to maybe an hour.
Yeah, so I think I don't know if you tried any of the tutorials. So they have some tutorials I was a little nervous about. So I like to learn how to play a game down to like the mechanics, down to like ideally even the code. I want to know everything about a game when I'm playing it. So I always start with tutorials. They have some tutorials in the game which really are good for both air combat and for submarine warfare. I think actually once you play those two, you probably have a fix on how to also do surface fleet stuff. And I would say that this game is intimidating because when you enter it, it is hardcore, and there's a lot of options available. But the actual gameplay cycle of what you're doing at any given moment is pretty simple. It's mostly, you hit F2, I think it is, to just bring up your like for your altitude that you're at or your speed, and then you bring up F1 to actually target somebody, and then you just adjust courses. Those are the three things I do. Like maybe you almost play entire scenarios just using those three things. So I don't think it's too difficult. THG actually knows a little bit more about the game because I learned from him that you can select a whole bunch of objects and hit G to make them a group.
So I mean, I think honestly, it might be intimidating up front, but it is the kind of game that I think is relatively intuitive with the controls that they have provided, as much as a game like this can be.
Let me just finish one thing. I wanted to say that I think the reason why it's a little intimidating is just because it does not look like your average war game. The GUI is completely different. It looks a lot more like Command Ops, or like, it does not look like, your resources are at the top of the screen, your mini-maps. So I think that's a little intimidating. But I think it's just, you have to get by that. There's a little discomfort when you first deal with the new user interface.
Yeah, that's the key, I would say, is that the user interface doesn't rely on traditional RTS conventions. So there's a little bit of learning there because it is a different base of controls. They did add the right click and then drag to move around the map with this version of the game, so that was a nice addition that is a little bit more in keeping with some other games out there. But there's, it's incredibly complex if you want it to be, and it's also simple at other times. And so depending on the complexity of the scenario you're in, things can be relatively easy or they can be relatively challenging. So in one of my scenarios that I was playing the other day, I was playing a scenario where the U.S., actually it was South Korea, was bombing targets in North Korea. That was relatively easy because we had Gen 4 plus fighters and aircraft and equipment going up against Gen 2, Gen 3 North Korean equipment that was just horribly outclassed. And so, all I literally had to do was click on a ship of mine, or actually it was a task force. I just, left-clicked on it. Then I went up ahead and I hit auto attack because there's options along the top of the screen. In addition to some drop-downs, there's actually just some quick buttons like auto attack or manual attack or whatever. And I clicked manual attack, clicked the target I wanted to destroy. I just clicked how many units I wanted to actually participate, and then I hit allocate, and as soon as I unpaused, cruise missiles were on the way. So, I mean, it can be pretty simple like that, or even simpler where, I had a group of fighters that was coming in on a that was flying around. I just right-clicked, dragged over all the units, so it highlighted them all, hit auto attack, selected the target I wanted them to attack, and they managed everything else. I didn't allocate Hydra rockets or Mark 82 bombs or anything like that. The airplanes just said, okay, you gave me an order to attack this target. I'm going to fly there, and I'm going to do it by myself without you getting involved. So there is an ability to micromanage, like I need to plot my unit around these SAM batteries, but there's also an ability to just kind of watch the game play out and play itself, depending on how involved you want to get. Now, some scenarios where the enemy's much more advanced and they've got better technology than you may be better served to be a little bit more micro-y. But it's a little bit different on every scenario, every adversary. And yes, the user interface can be something that's a little bit difficult if you're not used to it, to getting to learn. Honestly, the best thing that I would recommend for anyone who's interested in the game but isn't sure if they want to drop $80 on it, go watch some YouTube videos. And I'm not trying to promote myself. I'm not the best command YouTuber out there. Tortuga is a lot better than I am. Stoic Frog Gaming is really good. Kushin is good. I think he's in the beta with the actual developers. I'd say Belugan, but he works for them now, so he doesn't actually make videos anymore. But yeah, I mean, there's a wealth of videos out there. If you just watch some people playing, because there's so many drop downs and there's so many options to select, you can learn pretty quick from watching people play, because most people aren't using a ton of hotkeys. Most people are using the buttons that you see in the game, so you can kind of see what they're doing and why they're doing.
Yeah, I think this is, obviously, it's always good advice. If you're not sure how to play, just watch someone else play. And there's a lot of tutorial videos for Shimano. I think a lot of those will also be redone for Command. Yeah, I think that the game is a little bit intimidating because of its look. It looks militaristic. It looks like hardcore. It is hardcore, but once you get beyond that, it's really a discomfort thing. It's not going to be for everyone, but man, I've had a lot of fun playing it again, because I wasn't playing Shimano for a long time. Just other stuff comes along, but it's one of those things that once you get beyond the initial curve, it's very satisfying, and I think the game can also just be an encyclopedia, man. If you just want to look up, you just get into the game. I've had it before where I want to look up all the different units I'm playing around with, and I'll end up not even unpausing my turn because I spend time. They have such detailed information about everything. I spend like an hour just looking at all, like awing over all the different tools in my arsenal, learning, oh my god, this one has a pair of 5,000-pound bombs. That's amazing, stuff like that.
Yeah, I think that's actually, I've had a couple of people comment on my videos where they're like, $80 for a computer game? That's so much money. And then instantly someone will jump in and they'll be like, you realize that the database alone is worth more than $80. Even without the game, the database of units, you would pay like $200 to get all of the stuff through like Jane's or some other defense agency or whatnot. To provide it to you in that kind of a fashion at that level of quality. And, obviously not everybody really cares, right? Not everybody wants one of those encyclopedias, but it's worth mentioning that the database is gigantic and you can easily get lost in there and never find your way back out until you're an emaciated shell.
Well, so you guys are both on board you guys both recommend this game. So moving on to the meat. I wanted to actually kind of get you guys' feedback and what you guys think about another sequel that just recently came out, Unity of Command 2. I know you guys both been playing it. Initial thoughts. What do you guys think about the game?
Everything that Command is, Unity of Command is not. Mic drop.
I like that.
and not in a bad way.
Let's just say briefly what it is. Unity of Command, for those of you who aren't familiar with its predecessor, which it's very, very similar to, Unity of Command 2 is very similar to the Panzer General line of games. I would say very similar play style to Order of Battle, where you have hex-based. It's a bit puzzle-ish in the fact that you can't stack multiple units. It's all about allocating the right person to the frontage you have, which is usually limited. But a hex-based war game, you don't. And now in this one, they actually have logistics management, but it's not too crazy detailed. You basically have supply points you drop, and then you expand them with trucks. So anyway, I think that it's... well, maybe THG, you have something to add about the description.
I really like it. I think everything that Panzer General and Panzer Corps after it, and to some, but maybe a slightly lesser extent, Order of Battle, did a poor job of, I think Unity of Command does a great job of. It is definitely puzzle-ish. The logistics, by the way, is not a new thing. The Unity of Command 1, which focused on the Eastern Front, was the real standout of that game, opposed to any of the other turn-based World War II strategy games, was definitely the logistical element of the game. And Unity of Command 2, I think, does a good job of continuing that, but it adds some unique new challenges that didn't exist as much in Unity of Command 1. That has to do around like amphibious assaults in Sicily and Italy and then obviously in France. The game takes place in the Western theater of World War II. starting in 1943 in North Africa. You're playing as the Allies. The campaign is only played from the Allies at this time. They added a German campaign in the last game via DLC. They'll probably do something similar in this game. But essentially, it's from 43 to 45 as the Western Allies. And you fight through all the major campaigns in Sicily, Italy, France, and the drive into Germany. And there's some really interesting mechanics that I think we can probably get into. But I think it's an incredibly easily approachable game that has a surprising amount of complexity. But the real standout, the real hallmark is the logistics management. Because all of these, actually I would say two things. The way air power works, I think, is vastly superior to any other type of game like this. And the way that logistics work is likewise vastly superior to any other kind of game like this. And I'll leave the summary at that, and we can kind of jump into the details in a moment.
Yeah, I mean, I would say the only thing I would emphasize is the fact that it is puzzle-ish. So for people who want to get into war games, that's a good thing because it shares a lot of, similarities with things you might have already played. Even something like Solitaire. I mean, you kind of have the idea of this is what I want to do. I want to move this here, and then that one's not going to be able to get there, so I have to choose which is the better option, stuff like that. But so that makes it a good entry-level war game. But that also makes it, unfortunately, not a very deep war game. So I don't know. It depends on what you're looking for in your game. Have you played, John? I don't know. What were your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I've played the game. I have a lot of takeaways from it. One, the map is beautiful, right? So right off the bat, the terrain tactical maps that they did is gorgeous. Units look great. The game is very addictive. That's the one thing I will have to say about the game that I really take away from the game is every time I'm like, all right, you know what, this is going to be my last turn, right? You know what, just one more turn. So it's one of those games that it's like Civilization. You always want to do just one more turn. And so you wind up, going hours and hours into the game. So I really love that. I feel like it's Panzer Corps meets... Yes, I'm trying to think of like a supply game, but I can't think of any supply crazy game. So I'm just going to say Panzer Corps 2 meets a shit ton of supply logistics, right? You're the, NCO or the officer in charge of supply. You're kind of doing something like that. I really like that aspect that they included with supply. It kind of gives you a deeper respect for how supply and logistics work on the battlefield, because when in a traditional tactical game, you're just sending your forces forward and you're focusing more on flanking maneuvers and going around the enemy where the enemy's weaker. You can concentrate your armor there and try to do it like a blitzkrieg, combined arms, all that stuff. But then deeper, this game takes it one notch deeper where it says, all right, well, to do all this, you have to work on the supply. You got to make sure all this shit can actually happen in real life because behind, from what I remember in the Army, is for every combat soldier you put out in the field, there's about 7 to 10 soldiers that have to support them from, and a lot of them are doing logistics work, making sure the soldiers got bullets, MREs, all that stuff. So it gives you a greater appreciation that, the units are not just, unlimited, hey, they can travel the world, on one tank of gas kind of thing. You have to kind of strategically plan your offensives based upon how far your headquarters is, how good your supply is. If you move too far forward, obviously that's going to be a bad thing because you can't put fuel in your trucks. And then if you have German Panzers coming at you, you're in a world of shit. So I do like that aspect. What do you guys think about the supply system? How do you feel like that incorporates into the game?
I adore it. So I think the thing that the game does really well is it stresses the importance of certain avenues of advance, of securing your flanks, of understanding why certain places were important from a logistical perspective. I think one of the things, in terms of how supply works, right? So essentially, you have a supply depot that you can put anywhere on the map, but the game will generally start a scenario with you having one or multiple supply depots. That depot will have a range. The range is determined, one, based on your technology, so we can talk about the conferences in a minute. Basically, between battles, there's a conference where you can spend prestige on new units or on improving your headquarters for different units. And one of the things you can improve is basically your logistical reach. Essentially, I'm assuming it's measuring the efficiency of your trucks. So you are every supply depot has a range based on your technology and the amount of trucks you assign to it. You can keep assigning trucks to a supply depot until you run out of trucks. You only have so many, but you lose a little bit of efficiency over time. So the bigger it gets, the bigger your range you're trying to cover, the less efficient you're trying to cover. So it makes sense to set up multiple supply depots to get a better coverage. But the problem with that is that as you advance, one of the things you have to keep in mind is a supply depot has to be within 5 hexes of a railhead. If you're traveling along a railhead, a railway line, the railway line is always in supply. You can put a depot anywhere within 5 hexes of a railway line. Supply will travel more efficiently up roadways, so there's major roadways, there's minor roadways, but then there's also things that can happen that can disrupt that supply. So if a bridge gets blown by the enemy, that can disrupt your supply. If an enemy unit is astride one of those roadways, that can cut off supply. And so I think it does a really good job of modeling the complex nature of a supply chain in a really simple and approachable way. The key to remember is rail lines are always in supply, but if you move 1 hex off, you might be out of supply. You need to put depots in to build a radius of supply off those railheads, but you have to make sure the depot is within essentially supply range of a railhead. And then roadways are more efficient to transporting supplies longer distances, and you probably want to set up multiple depots to get a more efficient transfer of supply, as well as investing in better and efficient technology for supply transport. And so this game does a really good job, I think, and I won't go on too long on this tangent, but I think this game does a good job of modeling the slogfests of sort of narrow conflicts like in Normandy, with the gigantic logistical hurdles of traveling halfway across northern Europe with a supply depot that's anchored all the way back in Normandy when you're all the way at the German border. And so I think it does a good job of sort of managing all of that complexity and having a wide variety of scenarios, from really short-range scenarios that are basically just trying to take Monte Cassino in the Italian Alps, or not Alps, but in the Italian mountains, with long-range scenarios like trying to break out to Antwerp. There's a lot of variety in the scenarios.
So the one question that I have, and maybe you can shed some feedback on this. One of the key features is a dynamic campaign where you can rewrite the Second World War and with a branching campaign with no 2 playthroughs are alike. So I played about 2 or 3 scenarios, and I noticed that, I lost the first one, right? And I had to repeat it, until I won. I won the second one. I think I'm on the third one now. So how does that work? So if I lose, I guess, the Operation Husky, does the game have me repeat that, or does it go in a completely different direction?
So the way it works, and I will admit I haven't experienced this because I played with the press copy, which was a pre-release version that didn't have all the dynamism in it yet. But the way it works essentially is you're given a set of objectives you have to take to win a battle. If you fail to take those battles, let's be real, this is Western Allies in 1933-44. There's not a lot of variety, right? If Normandy fails, you probably have to do Normandy again. There's no Germany invades England in 44. That's not going to happen even if Normandy had failed. So you do replay battles if you fail at the base objectives. But I think where the dynamism comes in is there are secondary objectives, and if you accomplish certain secondary objectives, that can influence the next battle. Italy's a good example. So I took Monte Cassino early as a secondary objective, which historically was this slogfest of an engagement in sort of central Italy. And the developer told me, hey, if you were playing on the actual the commercial version of the game, you would have gotten an option for a different battle after that. So I think, and again, I haven't experienced this because the version I'm playing on is not the commercial version, or the one I was playing on is not the commercial version. I think what'll happen basically is it's similar to Panzer General, where you have to win to move on. But depending on how you win, you could get different follow-on scenarios based on the way the battle went.
Oh, okay. Interesting. I didn't know about that. So it's not a complete rewrite, like you were saying. If you lose Normandy, you have to redo Normandy. Certain scenarios you have to repeat. Other scenarios there will be secondary objectives.
That's my understanding. I'm like 12, 13 hours into the game. I haven't completed the Allied campaign yet, but that's my understanding. Also, different, like, so if you accomplish certain secondary objectives, even if you fight the same next battle, your starting position may be different. So I had that happen multiple times in Italy, where I actually had already taken an objective, and so my troops started further forward in the next scenario than they otherwise would have.
So the other thing I wanted to ask, so in terms of the objectives, do you guys feel like there's enough time to complete the objectives? I feel like I get to take the objective right exactly when it needs to be taken, right? So if they give you 6 turns to take it, I'll probably take it on turn 6, maybe 7. I notice the longer they go, like if you're supposed to take it by turn 6, by turn 7 you lose like 25 points or something like that. Do you feel like the game gives you enough time to take those objectives?
I did the first. I haven't played much of the campaign. I think we should also at least let people know that there is an abundance of scenarios that are available. I mean, I'm having a lot of fun only playing the scenarios, but I also did look at the campaign, and I only completed the first mission, but I took every objective before the time limit, so I didn't have a problem with that. It did push me. I was not comfortable. I probably took more losses doing that than... I'm sure I took more losses doing that because I did force some... I usually try to wait for 0 and 2 type attacks where you're not expected to lose any units and they're going to lose several. But I was not able to do every attack that way in order to get to the objectives on time.
The problem that I have in this game is I'm like half and half. So when I start the game, I'm like, all right, I want to make sure I take the least amount of casualties. So I kind of tread a little bit like a McClellan, right? And then I start realizing, holy shit, I only have 6 turns to take this objective. So then I flip over to my Pat kind of mode, and I just go all in, fuck everybody. I got to get that objective.
Yeah, I think the important thing is don't attack everything all the time. It's okay to bypass. It's okay not to actually attack an enemy unit. Go for the objectives. But I will say that the scenarios, yes, they're very tight on time. I've lost a couple of scenarios, not because I was losing the battle, that rarely happens, but because I couldn't get there in time. And that's intentional and that's deliberate. The scenarios, I think, are very well designed to make that time limit very challenging. You do get more points if you finish early. There is sort of a major victory thing. You get like in every battle where it shows you the objectives, it'll give you a turn number next to each objective. And it'll basically, if you achieve it by that point, it's kind of like a major victory. But, and that's obviously before the scenario end time. But yes, it is very difficult to get there in time, and that's the entire point and entire challenge of the game. That is another reason people will feel this game is pretty puzzly, because it's about how do I get to the objective? How do I, take the fewest amount of casualties, get to the objective, and ensure that I'm there strong enough to take it in time? But it is definitely challenging, and that is, I think the point is the scenarios are more races against the clock than they really are. Am I going to lose to Germany in North Africa? Probably not. But you might not get there fast enough to enable future missions that are supposed to occur.
Yeah, that's good. That's exactly how I feel about that, So there's like you were mentioning, there are times where I'm about to win, but I lose because I didn't take the objective on that exact point where I needed to. So.
Yeah, I mean, I'll use Race to Antwerp as an example. I was doing the Race to Antwerp scenario and failed probably 2 turns, maybe 1 turn earlier. I ran out of time. I needed 1 or 2 more turns. And I think what that's really supposed to model is like, if the Allies got bogged down in their race across France, what does that mean for Russia advancing against Germany? Does Russia get all of Germany before the war ends? Do the Allies end up getting counterattacked by the Germans in the middle of France? Do they lose Paris? What does that look like if the Allies get bogged down? So I think that's what they're really trying to model. And a lot of these scenarios, like, hey, once the Allies break out of France, there's no way in hell the Germans are stopping the Allies. It just depends how long it's going to take the Allies to drive across France.
Yeah. The other thing that I would have to kind of put out there, and these are like little minor things, so, I wouldn't put this in for like, not getting the game. These are just like little minor quarrels that I have. One, I would love to zoom in and out on this tactical map, to kind of get a little bit more closer to where the action's going,
You definitely can. You can zoom in and out. I complained about this. I complained about this in my overview. You have to hold control while you're doing mouse wheel. Even though spacebar and mouse wheel do the same thing, there's no way. This is the biggest complaint I have, is that there's no way to remap that so that just mouse wheel is used for mouse scrolling. I'm not sure who it was. I don't know if it was a developer or not. It's a person who spoke with great authority or confidence. If it wasn't a developer, the person told me that the reason why they did this is because you can probably play a little bit faster using the mouse wheel for the other options, because not only does it control whether or not you activate your extra movement, like Forsaken Combat, but it also moves the number of trucks that you're going to use in a supply depot up and down. And there's one other effect it has, but basically I think it's I think it would be much better if they didn't have it done that way. At least allow you to model it. I don't think that there's any reason for mouse wheel not to scroll in this day and age.
Yeah, I agree with that. The one thing I will say is at least they mapped the WASD keys, so props for that.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, there's probably a lot more detail we could dive into for this game, because I think it is surprisingly complex. But in the interest of time, I would say that this is an interesting. This is a very approachable war game. If you've never gotten into wargaming, this is probably a great starting point. If you're into wargaming and you enjoy turn-based war games, but you want something with a little bit more complexity than your typical Order of Battle or Panzer General, this is probably a good place to check out as well. I mean, one of the ways that you crack the nut of German defenses is you have to do artillery barrages, you have to order set-piece attacks, you have to order feints or other things like that. It is more complex than your traditional Order of Battle or Panzer General type of a game. So it's definitely worth a look. I'm very impressed. I really enjoy this game. But it may not be for everybody. There's other mechanics like conferences. I kind of gave a really brief overview of it, but I honestly could probably talk about this game for like an hour and a half and still feel like I have more to say. I really like it, other than the mouse wheel thing, which is a really bizarre design decision. I think this is a really slick game, and I recommend people checking it out.
I even can put a number to it. I think I was thinking about it a little bit. I think I would give it an 8.5 out of 10. And I think the reason why I'm not giving it a perfect score, it's a very good entry-level war game, again, and it's not even entry-level at this point because of the logistics stuff. And I didn't speak too much about the logistics, but I think it's pretty well done. It's kind of like Advanced Tactics Gold and Gary Grigsby at a much simpler level, in that you have supply propagating, based on the cost of movement. So it's pretty simple in that sense, but it's good. It gives you a good base level feel of doing logistics, and all the things THG said were true. It's going to force constrictions and stuff like that. But the other thing is, it's very puzzly. The thing which kind of drives me batty is the fact that you have to somehow coordinate moving one unit forward, attacking with it, have enough movement points to move it back off the front line, and then move another unit forward. This just makes me feel like I'm playing one of those, those 4x4 grids where there's 15 squares and 16 slots, and you got to move one over, one here, and you keep adjusting them until you get the picture just right.
Yeah.
That's what I feel like I'm doing a lot in this game, and it drives me nuts because that's never what war is like. I mean,
and it's also opposed to games, Jean, I know you're familiar with Civil War Generals too. Unlike games like that where you've got all the space in the world to do exactly what Tortuga just said, you are crammed you are like in public transit in the subway in New York on the Normandy maps or the Sicily maps or the Italy maps. There is no room to maneuver. So a lot of times you've got units that are just sitting around doing nothing because you can't get them to the front because everything's so packed in.
Yeah. So I don't like that side of it. It's fun. It's still fun from a puzzle standpoint, but at no point in time when I'm doing that, bouncing units forward and backward, at no point in time do I feel like a real general. It's very gamey. It's a mechanic, and that's why I consider this little puzzle based. So, I've had several people after I pointed that out in my overview mention to me, yeah, you know what, that's right, and that's part of the reason why I'm not enjoying it as much as I thought. But that also is part of the appeal for people who are not already hardcore wargamers. There's something there that they can latch onto.
Yeah, and the one thing I would say about that is, for some of the battles, not all of them, but some of the battles, I do think that probably has some element of history in it, though. Like, if you look at the Normandy campaign, the Allies could definitely not bring their full power to bear in the Normandy campaign in the early days because there was simply no room to maneuver. There were too many men in too narrow a front, and, as a result, they were kind of hemmed in and boxed in, and it took them a while to break out. There was no room for maneuver, and maybe in some sense, if I'm being very charitable to the game, that mechanic helps to model that. But in general, yes, you're right.
Nah, I don't really see it myself. I would disagree. I don't think there's never a point in time when you're like, oh my god, the front's so crowded, we need to move this unit 10 kilometers off the front. The way I would describe it is, you normally have units not all on the front because it's only wise to have a reserve line. You need people to rest, which means you need them not in combat awareness. I mean, you cycle people in and off the front, not because you don't have space on the front. It's because there's other reasons, defense in depth or R&R, stuff like this.
Well, I mean, there were definitely scenarios in various points in Normandy where if they could have brought more units, more tanks to the front, they would have, but they simply were too packed in.
Why is that the case? I don't know if that's the case.
They could not, without turning it into human wave assaults in World War I and just getting mowed down because they were too packed in.
To me, I thought it was more like, we aren't going to attack with this many people, but it's not like we need to keep people 5 miles or 10 miles off the front because there's no space for them in the front. Which is the way I get. Anyways, we're bogging down on a minor point. It's fine. Whatever you want to think about it. It's puzzly, and that's going to satisfy some people and not others. So
yeah, overall, I really like this game. It's it's definitely addictive, and I keep thinking about playing. When I close down the game, and I'm like, all right, maybe see if I can get an extra hour in, and then, a little later in the day. So it's definitely one of those games, and it's priced at the regular retail price is $29.99. So it's a really good game just to dive right into without, paying the $50 or $60. Bearing all that in mind, I wanted to ask you guys, what are you guys drinking tonight?
Well, it's Sunday night, and it's about 1 a.m, and I work tomorrow, so I'm drinking some cherry sparkling water.
Ah, saucy.
I'm drinking water myself.
I just finished my black coffee, and I'm watching, I'm going to be watching The Little One for another 2 hours. So, yeah, I don't drink when I have to watch The Little One, so. Yeah, so it seems we are all dry tonight.
Yeah.
As usual. All right, guys. So that does it for episode 47 of the Single Malt Strategy Podcast. We hope you guys enjoyed it, and we will catch you guys next time.
Money, money, money.